"You're not the pilot." The words exploded down the narrow aisle like turbulence hitting steel. The flight attendant's voice was sharp, slicing through the hum of the cabin as if the passengers themselves needed to be warned. She didn't whisper. She wanted the entire row to hear. Her finger jabbed toward the black woman standing calmly in her pressed Navy uniform. The cart stood frozen between them, silver trays rattling. The attendant's face was flushed, mouth curled with certainty. "Step aside. Don't play dress-up in a captain's jacket. This isn't your seat, not your cockpit, not your place." A hush spread. Heads lifted, newspapers lowered, phones unlocked. The space that had felt like an ordinary boarding moment now thickened into something else, an arena. The woman in uniform did not flinch. Her blazer was fitted, wings pinned to her chest, stripes of authority stitched into her shoulders. One hand rested on the handle of her black flight case. Her eyes were steady, quiet but burning. The young man in row 3 leaned forward, thumb hovering over his phone. His lips parted as if he couldn't believe what he was witnessing. An older man behind his paper finally glanced over his glasses, gaze narrowing, and the attendant kept pressing. "You don't belong here. This cabin isn't for you. Go back to economy before security makes you." The words landed heavy, like verdicts, not commands of policy, accusations of identity. The black pilot's breath was slow, shoulders anchored. She had heard this tone before, years back in a lobby, at a checkpoint, on a runway. Same energy, different faces. Always the same dismissal. But here on this plane, it carried a sharper edge, because in less than an hour, she was scheduled to fly this aircraft. Because what the passengers didn't know was that her role stretched far beyond the cockpit. She didn't answer yet. Not to the venom, not to the doubt. And in that silence, the cabin began to tremble with something else. Anticipation. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change. And we're glad you're here. Now back to her. Her jaw stayed still, but her eyes spoke volumes. The restraint was intentional, the calm sharpened by years of knowing when not to give the moment away. The attendant leaned closer, voice louder now, determined to break that stillness. "You're not the pilot. People like you don't fly planes. You're wasting everyone's time." Gasps fluttered. One passenger whispered, "Did she just say that out loud?" And in that instant, the story truly began. Her name badge read Captain Janelle Harris. To the attendant, it looked like just another prop. To the passengers, it was just another uniform. But the truth, what no one in that cabin yet understood, was that Janelle Harris wasn't only scheduled to fly this aircraft. She owned the airline that paid every paycheck on board. She had chosen this day carefully. No entourage, no press, no announcement. Just her flight case, and a resolve that had been building for years. The purpose wasn't to fly a routine route. It was to test the very system she had rebuilt from the ground up. Janelle wore her uniform, sharp but simple. Navy blazer pressed to perfection. 4 golden stripes across her shoulders, wings pinned just above her heart. Her hair was pulled into a braided crown, each strand disciplined like her posture. No Rolex, no designer scarf, no diamond studs, only the tools of her craft and the quiet authority of someone who'd earned every credential she carried. Passengers didn't know her. They weren't supposed to. That was the point, because for Janelle, invisibility had always been part of the journey. She remembered being 24, walking into her first airline interview with a spotless transcript and over 200 logged hours in the cockpit. The recruiter barely glanced at her resume. Instead, he leaned back and asked, "Are you sure you're in the right room? Pilots don't usually look like you." The words had stung, but they had also fueled her. Every slight became altitude. Every dismissal, fuel. Now, decades later, she was not just in the right room, she had built the room. She had signed the contracts that kept the jets flying, negotiated the mergers that doubled the fleet, and written the very safety protocols the crew was supposed to follow. And yet, standing here, in the middle of her own aircraft, she was being told she didn't belong. The irony wasn't lost on her. It wasn't anger that settled in her chest, it was memory. Behind her, the hum of boarding continued. Luggage thumped into overhead bins. Seatbelts clicked, but around her, time seemed to slow. The aisle became a stage. The voices around her, an audience waiting for a verdict. The young man with the phone lowered it for a second, whispering, "She looks legit. Why are they pushing her?" His seatmate shrugged, uneasy. Janelle didn't respond. Not yet. She let the silence build, the tension coil. Calm was her armor, patience her weapon, because she knew something the attendant didn't. This wasn't just another flight. This was a test, and the entire cabin was about to learn who really held the controls. The attendant's voice didn't soften, it sharpened. I said, "Step aside." Her cart blocked the aisle like a barricade, stainless steel glinting beneath the cabin lights. She crossed her arms, chin lifted. "Passengers are boarding. You're causing a disruption." A second voice joined. Brian Foster, another flight attendant, younger, smug, appeared from the galley. He looked Janelle up and down, a smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Uniform looks good on you," he sneered. "But this isn't Halloween. Cockpits off. Limits to tourists." Laughter, thin, nervous, bubbled from 2 rows back. Not all passengers, just one man in a blazer who thought the joke was safe to enjoy. But the air didn't laugh with him. It thickened. Janelle's jaw stayed firm. Her hands rested lightly on her case. No words, no movement. The female attendant leaned forward, her voice rising so every row could hear. "She's trying to impersonate crew. We've seen this before. Some people print fake badges, buy knockoff uniforms online, sneak into premium cabins. Well, not today." Brian added fuel. "Economy's back there. Middle seat's got your name on it." He pointed over his shoulder as if dismissing her presence was that easy. Passengers shifted. One woman frowned, whispering to her husband. Another man quietly pressed record on his phone, the red dot glowing from the screen. And still Janelle didn't speak. Her silence unnerved them. They wanted protest. They wanted anger, maybe a plea, something they could label non-compliance. Instead, they got composure. Brian leaned closer, voice low but meant to carry. "Look, sweetheart, just walk away before this gets embarrassing." The words struck the rows like shrapnel. A teenager gasped. The older man behind his newspaper folded it completely now. Eyes narrowed on Brian. The first attendant straightened her scarf, taking confidence from his support. "We'll call the captain. Security, too. You'll be escorted out before takeoff. Don't think you can play games in my cabin." Passengers began murmuring louder. A ripple of unease spread. Phones hovered higher. The aisle was no longer just a passageway, it was a spotlight. Janelle's gaze lifted, slow, deliberate. Her eyes locked with the attendant's, calm, steady, unblinking. She said nothing. But the silence was louder than any retort. And in that silence, the tension rose higher, coiling tighter, ready to snap. The aisle buzzed with whispers, but Janelle didn't move. Her breathing was steady, measured, as if turbulence itself couldn't shift her stance. One hand rested lightly on the flight case, the other by her side. Fingers relaxed, not clenched. The attendants wanted reaction. They fed on it: anger, denial, panic, anything that could be spun into defiance. But Janelle offered none. Her silence spread like smoke. Passengers leaned in, expecting an argument, a raised voice, some proof pulled from her pocket. Instead, they saw stillness, a calm so sharp it felt like a warning. Brian chuckled nervously, mistaking patience for weakness. "See? She's got nothing. If you belonged here, you'd say something." But Janelle knew better. She had been here before, not on this plane, not in this cabin, but in countless rooms where her competence was doubted before it was tested. And every time, silence had been her blade. She let them talk, let them build the case against themselves, brick by brick. The female attendant folded her arms tighter. Her voice lifted another octave. "What are you waiting for? Get out of the way. Do I need to call security twice?" Janelle blinked once, slowly, the kind of blink that carried centuries. She shifted her weight slightly, not in retreat but in grounding, anchoring herself into the floor as if daring the turbulence to come. The man with the phone in row 3 whispered, "Why isn't she saying anything?" His friend murmured back, "Because she doesn't need to. Look at her." The silence thickened. Every second it stretched, the crew's control frayed. Janelle's mind flicked back, uninvited, to another silence. A hotel lobby years ago, where a clerk refused her ID, insisted the reservation was fake, while guests whispered around her. That day, she learned that sometimes the most powerful answer was no answer at all, because silence forces others to reveal themselves. Brian shifted uncomfortably now. He cleared his throat, searching for bravado. "Guess she doesn't have the guts to admit she doesn't belong." His words rang hollow, like metal striking empty air. Passengers weren't convinced anymore. Their eyes weren't on Janelle's silence, they were on the crew's desperation. And through it all, she stood motionless, calm, unbroken. Not a plea, not a flinch, not a wasted breath. The storm was coming, but Janelle Harris had chosen her battlefield, and silence was her opening move. A red light blinked. Row 3. The young man who had been watching too closely finally raised his phone high enough to catch the scene. His thumb hovered for only a second before he whispered, almost to himself, "People need to see this." Across the aisle, his seatmate frowned. "Are you sure? This could get ugly." He didn't answer. The record button had already been pressed. From row 5, a woman in a gray business suit lowered her laptop, eyes narrowing. "This doesn't look right," she muttered. Her companion, a man in khakis, nodded uneasily, pulling his phone halfway out of his pocket. The cabin was no longer anonymous. It was a stage, and every passenger was now part of the chorus. The older gentleman in row 2 folded his newspaper completely, resting it on his lap. He adjusted his glasses and spoke just loud enough to carry. "She's in uniform. Why are they treating her like a trespasser?" His words weren't shouted, but the authority in his tone made nearby passengers lean closer. The female attendant stiffened, hearing him. Her smile was brittle. "Sir, please remain seated. This doesn't concern you." But it did. Everyone felt it. The tension had spread like static down the aisle. A mother, traveling with her teenage daughter, leaned forward, whispering, "See, this is what I told you about. Some people get judged before they even speak." The girl's eyes widened, clutching her phone, recording too. The hum of the engines, the shuffle of boarding, all of it faded under the sound of clicks, beeps, and murmurs. The cabin was becoming a witness box, every passenger a juror. Brian noticed the glow of screens. His smirk faltered. "Turn those off," he barked, but his voice cracked, betraying the thin edge of his authority. The young man in row 3 didn't lower his phone. "Why? Afraid someone will see how you're acting?" Gasps, whispers, a ripple of approval. For the first time, the weight of the cabin tilted away from the crew. Janelle hadn't moved, still calm, still silent. But now she wasn't alone. The silence had birthed a chorus, the quiet outrage of strangers who recognized injustice when they saw it. The female attendant's voice rose again, louder, desperate to retake control. "All passengers remain calm. This woman is impersonating crew. Security is already on its way." But the spell had broken. Too many eyes, too many cameras, too much doubt. The cabin no longer looked at Janelle as an intruder. They looked at the attendants as accusers scrambling to defend a crumbling lie. And in that shift, the balance of power began to tilt. The aisle shifted again. From the front of the cabin, a tall man in a crisp vest and polished shoes strode forward. His ID badge swung with each step. Daniel Pierce, purser, the highest-ranking crew member on board. His presence alone should have calmed the scene. Instead, it sharpened it. "What's going on here?" he demanded, his voice carrying over the low murmur of passengers. The female attendant answered quickly, relief flooding her tone. "She's pretending to be flight crew, tried to access the cockpit. We need her removed." Daniel's eyes scanned Janelle, up and down, slow and heavy. He didn't look at the stripes on her shoulders or the wings above her chest. He looked at her skin, her posture, her silence, and then he smirked, as if he'd solved a puzzle. "Not the first time we've seen this," he said flatly. "A uniform doesn't make you a pilot. Anyone can order one online." Gasps rippled again. The man in row 2 shook his head in disbelief. "Are you blind? Look at her. That's not a costume." But Daniel pressed forward. He positioned himself directly in front of Janelle, blocking her path, voice rising. "This isn't a debate. You're not authorized. Step back before this escalates further." Brian crossed his arms, emboldened by Daniel's arrival. "Told you she doesn't belong." Phones rose higher now. The young man in row 3 whispered to his camera, "This is insane. They're doubling down." His screen caught Janelle's stillness framed against Daniel's towering figure. Janelle didn't move. Not a word, not a flicker. Her calm was steel. Daniel leaned closer, lowering his tone, but loud enough for passengers in the front rows to hear. "You're embarrassing yourself. Get out of this cabin before you make it worse. You don't want to end up in handcuffs." The older gentleman's voice cut from behind, sharp as a gavel. "She hasn't said a word, not one word, and you're threatening her?" Daniel turned, irritated. "Sir, stay seated. You don't understand our protocols." But the cabin understood plenty. They heard the tone. They saw the imbalance. They felt the wrongness of it bleed through every word. The female attendant straightened her blazer, emboldened again. "Security is coming. She'll be gone in minutes." Murmurs grew louder. Screens glowed brighter. The air was no longer calm, it was charged, humming with disbelief and anger. And in the middle of it all, Janelle Harris stood silent, unbroken, her presence anchoring the chaos like a storm gathering around its eye. The escalation had arrived, but the reckoning had only just begun. Daniel's patience snapped first. With one swift motion, he reached for Janelle's chest and tore the name badge from her blazer. The plastic cracked as it hit the floor, sliding under a row of seats. Gasps erupted. A woman clapped a hand over her mouth. The young man with the phone cursed under his breath. "That's enough proof for me," Daniel said, his voice sharp. "Real crew don't hide behind fake IDs. You're done here." The female attendant seized the moment, snatching Janelle's flight case from her side. She dragged it halfway down the aisle, wheels clattering against the floor. "This doesn't belong to you either. Let's see what kind of lies you're carrying." Passengers shouted now. "That's theft. Give it back." The older gentleman stood halfway, gripping his armrest. "You've crossed a line." But the attendants didn't stop. Brian yanked open the flight case, scattering papers and a neatly folded cap across the carpet. He kicked the cap aside with the tip of his shoe, sneering, "Look, cheap fabric, not regulation." The teenage girl gasped. "That's her pilot hat?" The female attendant shot back, voice dripping with scorn. "Please. She bought it online." Daniel gestured toward the intercom panel near the galley. His tone was final. "Security to gate B-14. Immediate removal. Passenger impersonating crew." The words crackled over the speakers, echoing through the cabin like a sentence passed. Phones shot higher. Passengers shouted louder. The hum of ordinary boarding had dissolved into chaos, and still Janelle did not flinch. She bent slowly, calmly, retrieving the scattered cap, brushing it clean with a single swipe. Her movements were precise, deliberate, almost ceremonial. The aisle was trembling with outrage now, but she remained its center of gravity. Brian smirked, stepping closer. "What's the matter? Cat got your tongue? Not so confident without your little props, huh?" The words were cruel, but his eyes betrayed something else. Unease. Because her silence wasn't defeat, it was defiance. The cabin knew it too. The witnesses had multiplied. Screens glowed in nearly every row. Whispers turned to declarations. "She's in uniform." "This is racist." "They're humiliating her for nothing." And at the heart of it, Captain Janelle Harris stood tall, hat in hand, a storm gathering quietly behind her eyes. The line had been crossed. There was no going back. The cap rested in her hand, but her eyes never left Daniel's. For the first time since the conflict began, Janelle moved with intent. She set the cap carefully atop her case, lifted her phone, and pressed a single button on the side. Her voice was calm, steady, unshaken. "Rachel, Initiate Protocol 7. A faint chime echoed through her earpiece, then a voice crisp, professional, immediate. "Confirmed, Captain. Incident logging has begun. Live feed routed to the boardroom." The attendants froze for half a beat. The words didn't fit their narrative. Boardroom? Logging? Passengers exchanged glances. Phones tilted higher. The young man in row 3 whispered, "Did she just say boardroom?" Daniel scoffed, but his voice cracked. Cute trick, talking to some friend pretending to be corporate. Janelle didn't blink. "Rachel," she continued, her voice clear enough for the nearest rows to hear, "document the exact words spoken. Timestamp every insult. Escalate directly to operations." The reply came sharp. "Already done. Evidence packet compiling. You have full authorization to proceed." Gasps. A woman near the window muttered, "This doesn't sound like a passenger." The female attendant bristled, trying to reclaim control. "Ignore her. She's bluffing. Security will handle this." But the bluff didn't feel like a bluff anymore. Not with the precision in her words, not with the authority in her tone. Janelle lowered the phone slightly, but not her voice. "Every second you continue, every word you speak, is logged permanently. Choose carefully." Silence rippled. Daniel shifted his weight, suddenly aware of the dozens of screens recording his every move. Brian attempted a smirk, but it landed hollow. "So what? You've got a friend with a phone. Big deal." Janelle's eyes flicked to him, calm as steel. Not a friend, an executive assistant, and the system she just activated doesn't miss a thing. The older gentleman in row 2 leaned forward, his voice firm. Sounds like she knows exactly what she's doing. The tide in the cabin shifted again, subtle but real. Doubt spread, not toward Janelle, but toward the crew. The female attendant crossed her arms tighter. She's just trying to scare us. Janelle finally bent, lifting her cap from the case, placing it on her head with deliberate care. The golden wings gleamed under the cabin lights. Her voice, quiet but sharp, cut the air. You should be scared. Not of me raising my voice, not of me posting a video, but of me telling the truth with the full weight of the company behind it. The attendants faltered. Passengers leaned in. And for the first time, the crew looked like the ones out of place. The counterattack had begun. The aisle felt frozen in time. Dozens of eyes locked on Janelle, the hum of the cabin reduced to shallow breaths and the faint buzz of recording phones. Daniel still stood rigid, trying to project authority, but the tremor in his jaw betrayed him. Brian's smirk had vanished, replaced by the nervous tapping of his shoe against the galley wall. The female attendant clutched her useless device like a shield already shattered. Janelle took one deliberate step forward. She adjusted her cap, the golden wings gleaming beneath the overhead lights, and straightened her shoulders until her presence filled the aisle. "You keep demanding to know who I am," she began, her voice steady, low but resonant enough to pierce through the murmurs. The words landed with the precision of a gavel striking wood. "I'll tell you." She let the silence hold for a beat longer, forcing every passenger to lean in, forcing every phone to capture the weight of the moment. "I am not a trespasser. I am not a fraud. And I am not a woman playing dress-up in a pilot's jacket." Her eyes moved deliberately from Daniel to Brian to the female attendant, each denial a blade stripping away the story they had built. Her hand brushed the stripes on her sleeve. "I am Captain Janelle Harris." Gasps spread like a wave through the rows. The teenage girl with the phone whispered into her mic, "She's real. She's legit." Janelle didn't stop. Her voice sharpened. "And more than that," she paused, scanning the cabin, making sure every passenger, every witness, every lens would remember her next words. "I own this airline." The cabin erupted. Gasps collided with applause. Some passengers shouted in disbelief. Others clapped instantly, their voices rising above the hum of the engines. The young man in row 3 nearly dropped his phone as he exclaimed to his live stream, "You guys, she owns it! They tried to kick out the owner of the airline!" Daniel staggered, his voice cracking. No, that can't be true. If she was the owner, corporate would have told us." The older gentleman in row 2 cut him off, voice booming with conviction. "You don't need corporate to recognize truth when it's standing right in front of you." His words drew applause, firm and unrelenting, until the sound swallowed Daniel's weak protest. Brian's confidence collapsed. He leaned into the galley, muttering, "We're finished. We're actually finished." The female attendant whispered, barely audible, "She owns it?" Her eyes darted between the phones, the passengers, and the woman she had tried to humiliate minutes earlier. Her face drained of color, as if every ounce of certainty had been ripped away. Janelle stood tall, voice cutting through the rising noise like a blade. "You tore off my badge. You scattered my cap. You mocked me, called me an imposter, in front of witnesses who will never forget what they saw. And you did it to the one person who built the system you thought you controlled." Her eyes swept across the rows, locking briefly with the teenage girl, then the older gentleman, then the young man still streaming. "This isn't your cabin, it's mine. And today, you learned the difference." The passengers erupted again, applause, cheers, voices shouting in solidarity. Phones captured every second, sealing the twist in digital permanence. And at the heart of it all, Janelle Harris stood unshaken, not just a pilot, not just a CEO, but the living proof that dignity doesn't need permission to take its seat. The revelation detonated through the cabin, and the aftershocks landed hardest on the crew. Daniel Pierce, the purser who had strutted into the aisle minutes earlier, suddenly looked like a man stripped of armor. His posture wilted. The authority he'd wrapped himself in drained out of him like air from a punctured tire. He stammered, words tripping over each other. That can't be. If she was the owner, we would have been told." But the passengers weren't listening. His voice had lost weight. Brian Foster, the younger attendant who had mocked Janelle most loudly, retreated into the galley. He pressed his back against the metal wall, palms sweating. His earlier smirk was gone, replaced by darting eyes and a whisper meant only for himself. "We're done. She's going to end us." The live stream from row 3 caught it anyway. The female attendant clutched her dead device, knuckles white. Her face was pale, her lips trembling. She shook her head slowly, whispering to no one in particular. She owns it. She actually owns it. The certainty that had fueled her arrogance shattered, leaving only the hollow echo of fear. Meanwhile, the passengers surged forward, not physically, but with energy. "She told you!" a man shouted from the middle rows. "You humiliated the owner of the airline," a woman added, voice rising above the buzz. Another passenger pointed his phone squarely at Daniel. "Smile for the camera. The whole world's watching." Applause spread, no longer scattered but thunderous, rippling like a wave from the front of the cabin to the back. The young man in row 3 spoke into his phone, exhilarated. "You're watching this live, yes. Live, this flight crew tried to kick out the CEO, the owner of the airline. This is history in real time." Daniel tried one last push. He straightened, fists tight, and barked, "Everyone sit down. This is still my cabin to control." But his words fell flat. Passengers ignored him. The power he once held dissolved into thin air, drowned out by clapping and shouts of support for Janelle. The teenage girl holding her phone whispered to her mom, her voice trembling but clear. "She's not just standing up for herself. She's standing up for all of us." And in that truth, the crew's collapse was complete. Their authority was gone. Their voices, powerless. Their presence, reduced to silhouettes against the spotlight now fixed on Janelle. In the center of it all, Janelle Harris didn't need to speak. Her silence radiated more power than their words ever had. The humiliation they had tried to script for her had flipped, crashing down on their own heads. What was once her trial had become their downfall. The cabin was a storm of applause and disbelief when Janelle finally raised her phone again. She didn't shout, she didn't need to. Her tone was steady, measured like a judge delivering a sentence. "Rachel," she said into the device, her voice carrying down the aisle. "Effective immediately. Terminate access for Purser Daniel Pierce, Flight Attendant Brian Foster, and Flight Attendant Kelly Monroe. Lock them out of every system." Passengers held their breath. Dozens of cameras caught the moment. Rachel's reply came crisp, almost surgical. "Confirmed. Executing now. System purge in 3, 2, 1. It happened instantly. Daniel's badge clipped to his vest, blinked red, then vibrated with a sharp denial tone. He tapped it against the galley reader desperately, but the machine spat out rejection in cold beeps. His face drained of blood. Brian's handheld scanner lit up once, then powered down, screen black. He jabbed the buttons frantically, panic spilling across his face. The female attendant's login pad went dark in her hands, its glow replaced by the dull reflection of her fear. Gasps broke out across the cabin, then cheers, then a wave of shouts. "She did it?" "They're locked out. This is live justice." The young man in row 3 nearly dropped his phone, turning it toward himself in disbelief. "You're watching this happen right now. They've been terminated in front of us. Their badges are useless. This is the most incredible thing I've ever seen on a flight." Daniel slammed his badge against the reader again, as if sheer force could rewrite the truth. The device answered with the same red glow, unforgiving. His voice cracked. This isn't possible. You can't." Janelle's eyes locked on him, her voice cutting through the noise like a blade. "I can, and I just did." Passengers erupted once more, clapping, cheering, some even rising from their seats to witness the justice unfold. A woman in the back shouted, "That's what power looks like." Another added, "That's what dignity sounds like." Brian slumped against the galley wall, muttering, "We're finished. We're actually finished." Kelly covered her mouth, tears forming as the reality sank in. The system they had abused to humiliate her had turned against them because it had never been theirs to wield. Janelle stood tall, unshaken. No gloating, no raised voice, no need to prove herself further. Her silence was verdict. Her calm was execution. The roles had flipped completely. The crew who had mocked her were stripped bare, powerless under the same system they once hid behind. And the passengers, witnesses, jurors, storytellers saw it all unfold in real time. The punishment wasn't loud. It was final. And for Daniel, Brian, and Kelly, there was no appeal. The cabin was electric. Applause swelled like thunder rolling through the fuselage. bouncing off leather seats and overhead bins. Dozens of passengers stood, clapping, cheering, some even raising their phones high above their heads as if to capture not just the moment, but the justice of it. And yet, in the middle of the roar, Janelle Harris waited. She let the sound wash over her, steady and unmoving, until the cheers quieted into silence once more. Only then did she speak calm, deliberate, every word carrying the weight of finality. You thought my silence meant I had no power. You mistook composure for weakness. That was your last mistake. Her words struck harder than any shout. The attendants flinched. Passengers roared again, clapping and whistling, their voices swelling until it felt as if the cabin itself had shifted sides. Daniel sat slumped in the jump seat, badge glowing red against his vest like a scarlet letter. Brian covered his face with one hand, whispering into the void. The female attendant stared at the floor, her shoulders trembling under the collapse of everything she thought she controlled. Janelle didn't look at them again. They were finished. The verdict had already been delivered. Instead, she turned to the passengers, the witnesses who had become her jury. "Let this moment remind you," she said, her voice steady but rich with fire, "that dignity doesn't ask permission. Respect isn't given because of a uniform or a badge. It comes from truth, from what you've built, from who you are when they try to strip it away." Phones shook as passengers recorded, some with tears in their eyes. The teenage girl whispered into her mic, "She's not just talking to them, she's talking to all of us." Janelle closed her case, lifted her cap, and set it firmly on her head. The gold wings gleamed once more, not as decoration, but as declaration. She stepped toward the cockpit door, her stride deliberate, her presence unshakable. At the threshold, she paused. Turning back, she let her eyes sweep across the aisle one final time. Her last words fell like stone into still water, rippling through every heart present. "I don't need to prove who I am. I am the proof." The cabin erupted. Applause thundered, passengers on their feet, voices rising in a chorus that drowned out the hum of the engines. Cameras flashed. Cheers echoed, and with a single click, the cockpit door closed behind her. Justice hadn't shouted. It hadn't begged. It had simply stood tall, spoken once, and let the truth do the rest. For every passenger on that flight and for every person watching the recordings that would soon spread across the world, Captain Janelle Harris wasn't just the owner of an airline. She was proof that silence, when paired with strength, can roar louder than any insult.